In today's episode, we are talking cattle markets. What is going on in the world of the cattle industry? Samantha Cozza-Wright and I are breaking it all down for you guys today. We are talking everything from current events and how that is affecting the cattle market to just the cattle market fundamentals in general and what we are seeing right now and what we anticipate to continue seeing for this cattle market as we go forward. We're talking volatility. We're talking the southern border. We're talking Trump's tweets on Truth Social. We're talking our packing industry. We're talking everything today. Samantha and I cover it all for you guys today. So before we hop into this episode, if you guys could take a second, if you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you subscribe and that you like this episode. And if you're watching on any of our podcast platforms, make sure that you are following the show, share it with a friend, and go rate and review it as well. We really appreciate it here at the team and helping us reach new audiences and more people within the cattle industry. Without further ado, let's go ahead and hear from Samantha. Samantha, welcome back to the podcast. We are kicking Dan to the curb today. He was supposed to be here with us, but then got busy and was like, you girls can handle it. So we're kicking him to the curb with joy today, and we're going to talk all things markets today. But how are you? How is life in Western Kansas? Do you consider Colby Western Kansas? Where
Northwest?
You guys are?
Yeah, we're about...
Okay, yeah. How's life in Northwest Kansas, I guess? How's harvest? I hear you guys are kind of starting to wrap things up. So how's everything going?
It's going good. Like I said, we'll probably finish up harvest today. I know there's bigger farmers in our area that still have 2,000-3,000 acres left. So, I mean, we could be getting our first snow before some of these guys finish up. Crazy.
Yeah, absolutely crazy. Seeing like Chicago and Wisconsin, like all of those places up there get their first snow this week. I was like, oh no, I'm not ready for it. Not yet, guys. Please, like, give me 3 more weeks, 2 or 3 more weeks without any snow. Give us some nice rain so we can get some of that fall grass going. And just, I'm not ready for the snow.
I hear you. Yeah.
Geez, gotta love it. Well, what's going on in the world of the markets?
My gosh, what's not going on, right?
Yeah.
There's been a lot of recent news, obviously, in the media surrounding the cattle industry. I think taking a step back for a minute, there's a lot that goes into it. So let's kind of look back a little bit towards last week. Mostly mid last week, we looked at the possibility of the south border reopening, how that would have a play on the market. And it definitely had a negative effect to your board midweek. No definitive date was ever mentioned about when the border would reopen, but there was a lot of premature push for it from certain parties. I think first and foremost, we have to address the threat that poses to obviously our domestic cattle herd in doing this prematurely. But as we look further into the first of the year, when it eventually does reopen, maybe even further past that, who knows when it'll be. But I want to point out, initial import numbers being put out, they're so minor. Last week, the initial report was 250,000 head of live cattle imports from the South. Like I said, minor numbers this year anyway. We kill that in a few days here just in the United States. So while, again, an over-exaggeration in the market, it definitely scared traders on the futures board. And then we fast forward a few days, and come Sunday, there was another screwworm case confirmed 600 miles south of the U.S. border. So up through Sunday, when that was first reported, that's 85 cases confirmed just through 9 days into the month. So I think that's crazy. It poses a real setback, and rightfully so, in the plans of reopening the border anytime soon. So as the focus on that has become put to the back burner, we move on to more recent news. We've seen Trump's Truth Social post surrounding his order for DOJ to investigate the Big Four packers. That's the first time that he came out with that. After trading hours on Friday, people kind of had a weekend to think about it. There was a lot of questions, how it would affect the market. Opened on Monday, and if you were watching the board, there wasn't a lot of direction early on. We weren't really sure what it was going to do, and then boom, we were limit up. Hard gains, very bullish. Come Tuesday, and even through the first part of the day here on Wednesday, there was a lot of volatility. Like I said, you watch the board periodically throughout the day. It was just all over the place, very volatile. We're just so worried that any sort of fluctuation at this point is going to be a limit down or a limit up move. And there's just not a lot of consistency. And the media poses such a huge spotlight on the cattle industry. The board is just so touchy to that. We just can't hardly take that sort of pressure on the futures board. So bottom line, we look a little more into that, into the DOJ order. As cattle producers investigating the Big Four, that's something we pushed for, for a very long time. We know, our presidential administration now knows, the packers control 85% of the market. They've been price fixing, they've been manipulating the market for years. Most recently, they had market ready cattle backed up in the north for months. To where they became drastically overfinished. You see them hauling cattle $5 to $6 a hundredweight further away to avoid bumping up the market where it needs it. The list goes on. We've seen Biden come out 2 or 3 times in his presidency and say he was going to order investigation into the Big Four, and nothing ever came of it. And I think part of the reason that Trump's comments have such a heightened effect is because, he typically does what he says he's going to do. Looking at that, Packer retaliation was a concern. A lot of the concern I was hearing is that they would take out long positions on the futures board. So whether they never had them to begin with because they didn't really want to put any pressure on an upward market and sort of shoot themselves in the foot, or if they never had them, it had no effect on the market given limit up moves on Monday. So as we get further into the week, we're seeing more volatility. There's just a lot of lack of direction. I think a lot of it comes from uncertainty. The government reopening probably has something to do with it as well. But looking from it from the other side, packers can't really slash slaughter any more than they already have. Given low slaughter volumes, they're not running these facilities efficiently as it is. Their price per unit cost, has got to be through the roof. And it's become such a trend now that we'll finish out the week 50,000 head back in slaughter than we were a year ago. And like I said with my comment earlier, although our herd, is fundamentally short, it's not like we don't have the live cattle available, because at one point they had market ready cattle backed up in the north for months. Regardless, there's still some skepticism. People are saying, well, aren't lower beef prices in the store going to come back, hurt the price of the live cattle? And I think from a speculation aspect, clearly there's a lot of volatility in the market. Fundamentally, I have a hard time believing that it will. And that's just going back to the minimal correlation between the beef industry and the cattle industry. In a different world, sure, these two would have worked in tandem given different circumstances. But because of the Packers, they don't have, and they haven't been for an extremely long time. I mean, we've seen prices high and untouched at the same time that live cattle prices were limit down, 2 to 3 times the same week. We've seen the same sort of trend back during COVID, but even worse. The Packers set beef prices based off, what they think they can get and what the consumers are willing to pay. When we go back and we look at live cattle prices, they're based off, supply and demand fundamentals. And had the Packers not been price fixing and manipulating the markets, I strongly believe before the industry took the spotlight in the media that we could have been driven to higher highs. But you also have to think, sure, we are very short of cattle, but we aren't necessarily as short of beef that we are live cattle, because we are efficiently producing more beef per cattle ratio than we ever have. And with less land at that. And then you factor in beef imports, which if we were to mandate country of origin labeling would also have a play, and a definite play in lowering beef prices for the consumer. Beef imports were at an all-time high in 24. They're already higher at this point than they were last time a year ago. And looking at that, we import about half the amount of cattle on a live basis than we do beef. Beef imports were at an all-time high in 2024. The price of feeder cattle and live cattle still remain fundamentally high. So given the minimal correlation, I don't think it'll have a huge play, but we also have to factor in the cattle industry is such a unique market in comparison to dairy and poultry and pork. And so it becomes a very unique scenario. We'll see how it plays out. The Packers have been running a monopoly for so many years. So in that aspect of things, we don't really know what a fair market looks like from them.
Is such a great point that it's been happening for so long that we don't know what that would look like. Like, if this gets rocked, changes, whatever happens and whatever comes out of it, we don't know how to react to that. Like, what would that look like? What would that do to the cattle industry? And you made so many great points along the line of we have seen such a volatile cattle market and such a unpredictable cattle market. Not just volatile, like this is volatility in an unpredictable standpoint that is being driven by media and by tweets and by what the consumers are saying, which historically has not been as big of a factor as it is right now. Right now, it is playing a massive role in just the cattle industry in general and what we are seeing in our markets and how everything is reacting. And I'm really grateful that that Truth Social post went out after markets closed on Friday and people had a whole weekend to ruminate on it before they made any drastic changes, because sometimes, like, I understand people got to be quick to the trigger on these markets when they're trading and when they're like holding or selling or like all of these different things. I understand that, but boy, oh boy, am I glad that that tweet got put out by this little secretary that's sitting at the office in the White House or whoever runs Trump's Truth Social after the markets closed on Friday. Very grateful for that. Because like you said, Samantha, it ended up kind of playing in favor. Now, whether or not it was like, I kind of anticipated some retaliation from them as well. And so very curious to see why, and we won't know the answer, why that didn't happen. Whether they just weren't holding those positions in the first place or what that kind of was. But it's been a very interesting time to sit back and see how much the media and current events are playing into the cattle market, which they always have. But I feel like we can all sit back right now and say that they're playing a bigger role than they have in years past as well.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. And, we're still kind of seeing cash strong in some areas. A lot of barns, they're still setting record highs. It's definitely softer for sure, but cash buyers have become so dependent on the board to set their price. So that's where also we're seeing the volatility trickle back into the cash market.
Yeah, absolutely. We're definitely seeing a lot more correlation as far as that goes and how much the board is playing an impact on the cash market and what we're actually seeing in the sale barns for our cattle producers at the end of the day. It's really intriguing, and I'm very curious to see how this DOJ thing plays out with the Big Four. Again, like you said, you made some great points. It's been something that has needed to happen for a while. So I'm very curious to see how that plays out and how that investigation and then the results of that investigation are going to affect the cattle market. Screwworm, I'm tired of saying that damn word. I'm honestly tired of it. But you made some really great points there too. Curious to see how that is going to continue to affect the markets, because we need to open that southern border up as far as a supply and demand aspect goes, but we also need to be protecting our domestic cattle herd, and we need to do it smart. We can't open that border back up, bring a bunch of feeders in, and therefore potentially impact our domestic cattle herd. It just doesn't, we can't risk that as far as the give and take of what that would look like. So we've got that in play. We've got so many other things in play. I know we touched on a few other things, but I'm very curious to see how those are all going to continue to affect the markets as far as our just commodities go.
Right. And kind of like you said, our heightened position as an industry in the media, I think people are definitely more aware of everything going on in this industry than they ever were. I talk to producers that maybe check the board, once every couple of weeks. And now people are glued to it, opening it up, 3, 4 times a day. People are just so invested and aware of what's going on. And there's been such a heightened focus on the markets and the cattle industry as a whole and the media. I think consumers and producers are playing even such a bigger part today than they ever were before, and definitely paying attention to that.
Absolutely. I would agree with that too, that I did not ever really check the board as a cattle producer, if I'm being completely honest, years ago. It was not something that I was extremely focused on. The correlation between the board and what we were getting at the sale barn was there, but it wasn't as drastic, right? And now it's one of those things that I'm that person too. Like, I've got the widget on my home screen that shows the consistent results of what's going on at that moment. So pretty much every time I'm opening my phone, I can see it. And so it is really interesting to see how, as a producer population, we have changed in how we are focusing on the market and how all of that plays in to our daily lives as producers at the end of the day, and how that is affecting us on our home operations.
And we also hear, heightened talk of mandatory origin labeling. I think that's huge. I think that's something also that has been a heightened focus from the consumer standpoint and the producer standpoint, and righteously so. These people, we're getting imports of beef from foreign countries, and just because they may be, packaged in the United States, they're labeled as US product. And there's definitely an issue with that. Had we have it out on the meat counter as, foreignly imported, whether it's Argentina imported, Mexico, wherever, I think that'll definitely also have a play on getting price down for the consumer. And I would be interested to see kind of what that looks like as far as I think it'll kind of be a little bit of a 50-50 split. Will people be more willing to pay the extra couple dollars for US beef? And personally speaking, I of 100% I would. And I think a lot of people will if they have the budget for it, because there's just not a lot of transparency in the industry and that side of things. We don't know what's going on over there like we do in our US plants. It's just, yeah.
Yeah. And I think like my biggest issue with the mandatory origin labeling is the fact that like you said, they were coming here as live cattle, being processed in the United States, packaged in the United States, and being labeled as a product of the United States. You don't have to put that it's a product of Argentina on there. Just don't put that it's a product of the United States, because it's not. Like,
Right.
I don't care if there is a label on there with a little country flag saying every single country that this animal came from. Just don't put a label on there, period. And then label the products that are US beef, born and raised, processed here as US beef. And again, very curious to see how those negotiations continue to unfold. I'm excited. I'm going to have a few more conversations about that this week with some other people on the podcast. So very curious to see other people's thoughts on that. And again, I think it goes back to letting our consumers choose. I don't know if we're going to see a massive change in consumer behavior because of it. But again, it just goes back to that honest labeling standpoint of, hey, as a producer in agriculture, I don't want a product of the United States label on Brazilian beef in my beef counter. I also don't want a label on my orange juice that says GMO free. That is just simply misinforming the consumer and causing more issues at the end of the day. And it's just a big fat marketing ploy that isn't helping anyone other than the retailers. So,
Yep, that's exactly right. And that goes back to just more transparency in the beef industry. And also going back to, if you can buy your beef locally, great. And if you look at the price difference compared to what you're paying per pound based on carcass weight, and having it cut and split the way that you want it versus what you're going to pay in the store, it's drastically different. So if you have that available to you, and much cheaper. So if you have that available, it's definitely an option to be looking at. We also see more small processors opening, more small processors in the process of opening, which is also going to pose more competition to the big four. So I'm excited to see what that looks like. And hopefully we can start to grow as an industry in positive ways.
absolutely. Absolutely. Well, as we close out the podcast, Samantha, any other thoughts or anything else that we need to touch on or hit on today that we haven't covered thus far?
Think so.
Perfect. Awesome. Awesome. Well, thank you for your time. This was a fun conversation. We're going to have to kick Dan out a little more often now. This was a lot of fun. I'm going to have to text him and give him a hard time about it. But thank you, as always, for your thoughts and your insight. To all of our listeners out there, thank you for listening to another episode of the CattleUSA Daily Podcast. I'm your host, Lauren Moylan, and with our guest, Samantha Cozza-Wright. Thank you for listening, and we will see you all tomorrow on another episode. Have a good one, y'all.